In today's session, we are going to talk about Cloud Access Security Broker, or otherwise known as CASB, right? So, what is CASB? When do we use it? What is some of the history of aspects of it? And these are some of the areas we're going to be talking about, right? So, first of all, what are some of the main features of CASB, right? So, really, if we look at the wording here, and when you break down CASB, right, it has to do with cloud access. And in essence, what it's doing here is becoming a broker to what you can access in the cloud. And for example, we want to block, for example, unsanctioned apps, right? Apps that are not allowed. We want to allow the sanctioned apps. We want to look at shadow IT, right? So IT, if we look at an organization that has an IT department and various different organizational stuff, right, they may be doing their own stuff, right? We don't want that. We want to control that. And that's where CASB would also come into, right? And we want to be looking at mainly online applications, right? So let's take an example here. For example, social media, right? So imagine you could go to a LinkedIn website. You can allow the user to surf the actual website but not look at the job postings, right? Or perhaps possibly go to Facebook and look at some feeds but not go into other areas of the actual Facebook. Or even like if you look at it, a Google or a Gmail account, right? So you may allow the corporate tenant to be able to be accessible to Gmail but not a personal Gmail account. And that's where the granularity of that CASB comes into play, right? So if we look at the 5 pillars of CASB, right, there is the data security, protect against loss, right? So we want to prevent that DLP, data loss protection, right? We also look at the threat protection here, the visibility. So CASB gives us that visibility when you're accessing those cloud applications. We want to be able to have the ability to have compliance, governance, and most of all, we want to have control, right? Control over that, the cloud aspects of it. So if we look at the history of CASB, right? In the old days, what is considered as Gen 1, right, is where we were looking at the shadow IT and kind of like discovering what are those individual departments and users doing essentially when they're accessing some of these applications, right? And that's what that Gen 1 was, where we're kind of like looking at the shadow IT aspects of it, right? And then that kind of evolved into Gen 2, right, which is basically API-based CASB, where we're looking at the API connections and all that kind of good stuff, right? And now what we see is the evolution to its current form, which is Gen 3. And in this instance, what we're looking at is, where CASB is in line to the actual, on the path to where you're accessing. So imagine you have an end user that's accessing, something like Facebook, Gmail, or something like that, is actually in the path of that actual traffic, right? And that's what we mean by inline here, right? And we can actually have an inline going through a forward proxy or a reverse proxy, right? So typically a forward proxy would be something which would be like a ZTNA solution, like a SASE model, right? A reverse proxy may be something that may be on the cloud side, right? For example, a load balancer front-ending some web servers, right? So, there are different locations where we can actually do the CASB, right? So then if we look at, what are some of the historical, the challenges of CASB, right? So before, CASBs were limited to the actual threat protection functionalities. And one of the challenges here was CASB was a standalone. It was by itself, right? And what we look at, the evolution from the old days and some of these limitations is now we look at, the CASB solution because today is much more integrated. It's integrated into other elements of security, right? For example, malware, virus protections, IDS, IPS, inline. So it's coupled with other security features, right? And today's CASB solutions are much more simpler. So you can just like configure it much more easily, and they offer a lot more flexibility, right? And the if you look at the pinnacle moment of how we arrived from that Gen 1 CASB, some of those previous challenges and limitations to what we are, what we really have to look at is the SASE model, right? The Secure Access Service Edge model, coined by Gartner, right? And I have another video that does a deep dive in SASE, but a CASB solution that is integrated as part of a SASE solution provides the optimal ability to do cloud access security brokering, right? Controlling that traffic, having the visibility, and all that kind of good stuff, right? So if we look at it, then the question becomes, so what is different? Like, what is CASB versus the SASE, right? Because today, typically, you do find most CASB solutions integrated into SASE solutions, right? So the main difference is the level of integration, right? So if you look at a CASB standalone, it is not integrated into the other moving pieces, right? Whereas if you look at a SASE model, there's a lot more integration into the different pillars of security, right? So you look at data loss protection, malware, IDS, IPS, etc., right? And then also another key element is securing software as a service applications, right? So that's an add-on here, right? Versus a full security stack, part of a framework, right? So that's another key difference here, right? Are we using CASB just to control the traffic to a specific SaaS solution, or do we want to do a full security stack inspections? Again, going back to that malware, IDS, IP, data loss protection, etc., right? And then, like the final bit here is the assets protected here, right? So, when we look at CASB, we're really controlling the actual access to something, but at the same time, when we look at a SASE model, we're also protecting the asset. We're also putting the lens on the source, not only focusing on the destination, but also protecting the source, right? And in that instance, what we're really doing here, and where the conversation really ends up, is that zero trust, right? Because CASB is a component that delivers the zero trust aspects of it, right? And then finally, Microsoft also offers their version of CASB, which is called MCAS, right? And again, when we look at CASB versus MCAS, that is something that we're looking in terms of, typically, like, for example, the Microsoft Cloud Application Security is much more integrated into Microsoft, right? Into that whole ecosystem. So it's integrated into Azure, is integrated into Office 365. So you see some of that synergy. And today, some of the players out there, like a CASB, ZTNA, or those kind of people, they do integrate into MCAS to provide that complete end-to-end portfolio, right? And if we're thinking about vendors here, we're talking about SASE, obviously we're talking about Microsoft, but if we look at the space of SASE, we have some of the vendors, like, for example, Netscope, right? That's considered one of the best in the field when it comes to CASB, right? Also, Zscaler is among those as well. So those are some of the kind of like the pure play ZTNA, SASE kind of model frameworks that are out there. So then the final kind of thing I just want to quickly point out on is really the essence of CASB is that it gives the ability to control the access security brokering across multiple environments, and it uses a number of app signatures to actually execute the actual controlling aspects of reaching that endpoint destination. And that concludes today's module. Thank you very much.